Welcome back for another classic episode of Green Box Politics. And I am your host, Red Stick Mirage, also known as Blackbeard. So this afternoon's video will be about a young woman by the name of Beverly Shamecca Ash from New York. And although the name may not be familiar, but when we talked about Nicky Barnes in episode 1, we mentioned how he had a girlfriend or women on the outside, and some of the men in his council was sleeping with some of his women. And there was one woman in particular, who seems to be the apple of Mr. Nicky Barnes's eye, or at least she was back then. So when he found information, concerning her disloyalty, this could have stirred up some negative emotion in him. And of course, one thing leads to another, and it could conclude in the death or the demise of people involved. So this episode will be, of course, educational and entertainment, for anybody who wants to use it as that. But in particular, I'm also talking to so-called Black American women, because some of you all may date, marry, or have children with guys that are in the streets. And some of you actually may be involved in certain street activity yourself. You may be involved in the drug gang. You may be a backdoor queen. You actually may be in a gang and you do, let's say, maybe the getaway driving. But you are involved in the streets as well. Whether you are woman A or woman B that I just described, you got to understand that the wolves, the beasts, the predators, the bears, the jaguars of the jungle, of the streets, they're not going to show you no love or no mercy. All right. So for women who may be innocent bystanders or people that had nothing to do with the streets, and, they died from, let's say, friendly fire or, mistaken identity, things of those purpose. This is not necessarily about those women. All right. Because those women had nothing to do with the streets. And unfortunately, they may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I'm talking about these women that, you're dating a guy or you married to a guy and you know that he's getting money in the streets. You know that he's out here in the drug game or the scamming game or whatever he's in. You know what I'm saying? Or you are a woman that's actually out here in the dope game, in the arms trafficking game, in the sex trafficking game, etc. You may be a woman in it. You got to understand that no, you won't be spared. You won't be spared. The python gonna devour you. He gonna constrict you just like everybody else. Okay? So understand that. And a lot of the times, you all don't be in a position to be able to defend yourself the right way. And then when it comes to the streets, majority of the times, you don't have that chess master cutthroat mentality to be able to see something before it comes. You don't have that Machiavellian mentality of the cunning fox that I've talked about in previous tapes. You couldn't sniff out an Alpo. Alpo, be them backdoor Jew, and you couldn't even see it coming. So you just got to understand and respect how deadly the streets is. It don't show love to men, women, children, anybody. All right. So understand that, and that's facts. So a little background on Miss Beverly Ash. As I said, she was from New York. And she was the girlfriend of Nicky Barnes, because you got to remember, Nicky Barnes had a wife that he was married to. So Nicky Barnes had a wife and he was married, and he had children with this woman, but he had a woman on the side, and this woman on the side that he was dealing with was Miss Beverly Ash. Now, according to, some of the things I looked into on this woman, she does seem like to be one of these powerful so-called Black American women in the streets. Maybe she was involved in a little bit of the drug gang, maybe setting people up, certain men that she dealt with. I think maybe one of her brothers was involved in the streets. So she, included in certain activities with them. But this may have not been just some, woman that was green. Maybe she had a little bit of an understanding of the streets. And of course, she was very, very attractive, very, very attractive woman. So she's also able to date and socialize with these guys in the streets. And then she was from Harlem, New York, and she was growing up in the 70s. You know what I'm saying? And she was young in the 70s. So she was part of that era of, like I've said before, the the heroin through the community, the cocaine, the black exploitation films from the 1970s. Of course, they started to so-called let, black Americans into a little bit more education and so-called affirmative action and a lot of that BS from the 1960s to so-called desegregate the country. They're now starting to, let certain so-called blacks in, but at the same time, there have to be certain casualties to allow this to happen. And a lot of those casualties were the people involved in the drugs that was allowed to funnel into the communities through the 1970s. So it wasn't just going to be like, okay, we're going to let all the so-called black Americans in now. We're integrated, we're in a new decade. No, like y'all got to pay for this. And the payment that y'all going to give is the pain and suffering through the drugs being pumped in your community. So Miss Beverly Ash, this is what she was growing up in. So, this is like the environment and the situation. So either she had decided, she was going to do the education stuff and maybe go to school or, become a nurse or whatever, or she could choose the streets. And of course, she chose the streets, or at least from what I see. All right. And the main thing, too, before we move forward as a woman, you got to understand, if you're dating a man in the streets and he's involved in certain activities, when it comes to not only the beef and, the cougars, you know what I'm saying, the Wolverines that's going to be attracted in the streets that you got to deal with, but also law enforcement. When your man is being watched by the police, by the federal government, do you have the strength and courage to take certain charges if you have to? Do you have the strength and courage and the patience to do a 10, 20, 30-year sentence because maybe you got caught with the pack? Do you have the power and fearlessness to look those investigators in the eyes when they got you on investigation hold and you've been sitting in the hole and you don't have no bond, and now they about to get ready to come talk to you because they really need some more information on your guy, and they gonna say, man, we don't really want you, we really just want your guy. We're going to let you go. We just need you to tell us X, Y, and Z and possibly testify if it come down to it. If he don't take a plea and he want to go all the way to trial, will you be an expert witness for us to save your own self? So you got to ask yourself, are you really built for that? And if you're not, then just know you rolling the dice and you putting your hand in the alligator's mouth by dating and dealing with these dudes that's involved in the streets, whether he's into the gangs, the drug money, etc. No matter what it is, what activity. The human trafficking, if he involved in the streets in any way, you got to accept what come with it. All right. So Miss Beverly Shamecca Ash, the girlfriend of Nicky Barnes, once Nicky Barnes is, caught by the federal government and he goes to prison, he's doing his time and he starts to hear information about people in his organization, misappropriating funds, people spending, a lot of money, living a very, very comfortable life while he's in the inside doing hard time. And then he starts to get information that his side women, or different women he's dealing with, they're sleeping with members in, his council, which was one of the rules that, the men were forbidden to do. And this individual was Mr. Guy Fisher, the man that he was teaching, who was younger than him. So remember now, Nicky Barnes was born in, I think, 1933. And Guy Fisher was, he was younger than Nicky Barnes by, I want to say, at least 15 years. Because according to Nicky Barnes, he was like a father figure to the council. So, that type of betrayal, it started to mess up and cause a little bit of a friction in the business. So I'm not going to say that, that the whole empire failed because of the woman. What it was is, this was a match that was thrown on top of basically an empire that had gasoline all over already. And it just needed something to use as a justification to set everything off. And of course, that was when Nicky Barnes decided to become a federal, informant. And he started to testify against other members in his council. So fast forward, you have the situation now where Nicky Barnes' empire is starting to crumble. But you got men within that are, going to take over and do a lot of the business and the daily operations, playing that role as the CEO. So Nicky Barnes is in prison. All right. Then the next man up is Guy Fisher. But then eventually Guy Fisher, he gets pinched. So now you're going to have different men stepping up within the organization, within the ranks, until it finally just dries up. All right. Now, once Nikki Barnes gets locked up and people start, going to jail, and, certain dope houses and trap houses are starting to be broken up, and police starting to, know more information, everybody else that's part of the organization, even if they weren't in the council, people starting to panic. They don't know who can be trusted. And really, one false movement can have somebody thinking, are you a federal informant? Are you a rat? Are you a mole? And next thing you know, they want to get ready to take you out. If you've ever seen the movie Goodfellas, that was in that movie. It may have been a crime that happened. And let's say, if they had gotten a drop of some information that the government was watching, then everybody that had been involved in that crime and could possibly become an expert witness, or a star witness rather, they would go ahead and execute him before the government got a chance to even catch him. So understand also too that Nicky Barnes, a lot of his principles and maybe the way that he saw his business organization on an executive level, a lot of that he got from those mobsters he was dealing with in New York. Okay, he was dealing with these different mobsters who were Caucasian. All right, so he could have appropriated some of this thought process from them. And you got to also remember this: if Nicky Barnes' whole heroin empire is contingent on these Caucasian foreigners providing him the drugs, that means that he has to make sure that this doesn't fall on them too. Because once you now start, you got the Italian mob, the French mob, now you got the government looking at them, and see, they're going to protect themselves. So now they're going to start eliminating and putting out hits and putting out murders and doing what they got to do. So to prevent it from getting there, Nicky Barnes, he has to be accountable and move a certain way. Now, this woman, Beverly Ash, she just found herself in the midst of all this, and also, too, she may have not been a princess. She could have been a backdoor queen. She could have been a setup queen. She could have been the one out there helping the gangsters doing whatever it was she was doing. And as we're going to find out in a minute, it appears she had a brother that was involved in the streets, too. And when she was, when she met her demise, so did he. Okay, so this all could have been, one big gumbo pot that they were all working in. But before we move forward, what I want to do now is introduce us to a document that I found, which is on Raymond Clark versus the United States of America, United States District Court, New York, SD, New York. And what we'll do is we'll go through this document, all right, and we'll get a better understanding of how Ms. Beverly Ash met her demise and who more than likely had her killed, all right? So this is a memorandum in order, Richard Owen, District Judge. This document can be found, by researching Ms. Beverly Ash herself. But this looks to be a legal document, all right? In the 1980s, Raymond Clark, among a number of others, was a co-conspirator with James Jackson, who more or less took over the Nicky Barnes drug empire in Harlem, New York City. Clark was convicted August 25th, 1988, after a 4-month trial before being sentenced to 50 years imprisonment. The enterprise distributed millions of dollars of narcotics over a 7-year period in New York, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere, and its members committed at least 7 murders to promote the enterprise, with Clark, according to the evidence at the trial, personally shooting 3 of them: Norman Bannister, Beverly Ash, which is who the tape is about, this woman Beverly Shamecca Ash, and Stephen Ash. Clark's memorandum on this motion erroneously asserts that, quote, hearsay from a confidential informant was the only evidence against Clark, end quote. The fact is, to the contrary, James Jackson, the leader who had taken a plea, testified to Clark, telling him just how Clark had committed each of the 3 murders. So it appears that this man, Raymond Clark, was given up by this individual by the name of James Jackson, who seems to be the leader or one of the men that were up to lead the Nicky Barnes empire after Nicky Barnes went to prison. So remember, like I said, when Nicky Barnes went to prison, the next man had to step up to lead the empire. And it appears that James Jackson was one of these men. But when James Jackson gets caught by the government, law enforcement, they now pressing him. So he has to start giving up information and tell. Is he going to tell on, the distributor or where they're getting the drugs from? Or can you give up somebody in the organization that committed murders? Because this is ultimately what the police, the government wants. They already know these drugs out there in the streets, but these murders, they got to clean that up. And it appears that Mr. James Jackson, according to this document, testified against Clark. So he's telling the police about these murders that Clark did, and Beverly Ash is one of them. So we're going to go through and we're going to get to Miss Beverly Ash and what happened with her. So on the first murder, now when it says question, that's the federal government asking Jackson a question. And when it says answer, this is Mr. Jackson answering the question. All right. So this is how the information is coming out about what eventually happened to Miss Ash. Question. What did Clark tell you what happened in the bar? He told me that when he went in the bar was pretty crowded, and that Norman Bannister was playing Pac-Man, and that when he seen JR on the door, he went behind Norman Bannister and shot him in the head. Question. Would you describe Clark's demeanor as he talked to you about the homicide? Answer. That he was bragging. As to the Beverly Ash murder, so this is the woman, Beverly Shamecca Ash, the girlfriend of Nikki Barnes. Did there come a time after that you had a conversation with the defendant, Raymond Clark? Answer, yes. Question, when was that? Answer, a few days after Mike told me about staying away from the Monarch Bar. Question, where were you when you had that conversation with Clark? Answer, I was in Eugene Romero's apartment in the Bronx on Clinton Avenue. Question, who lived in that apartment? Answer, Eugene Romero, Sharice, and Clark. Who was present during the conversation? Answer, Clark, Sharice, and Mike, but Mike was in the bedroom along with Sharice when the conversation took place with myself and Romar. Question, so just you and Clark were alone when you had the conversation? Answer, right. Question, would you tell us what Clark said? Answer, Clark said, quote, that was my work the other night up in the Monarch Bar with Shamecca or Beverly Ash. That was me, red alert. That was my work, end quote. And he went to the closet and he pulled out a rubber mask, white face, dark hair with the eyes cut out and nose cut out. And he put it on. He also took out a dark trench coat, and he put it on. And he says, quote, you want to see how I did it, end quote. And he came up to me and he said, quote, yes, they think it was a white guy. It wasn't a white guy. It was me, red alert, end quote. And he came up to me and he had his hand and his back hunched. And he said, quote, I walked in with my back hunched down and she was sitting at the bar stool and I just shot her, end quote. Question, what type of mask was it that defendant Clark was wearing? Answer, it was like one of those Halloween masks, B. A rubber mask with dark hair, Caucasian color, with the eyes and the nose cut out that you could slip over your head. So that's how Beverly Ash was murdered. She was sitting in a bar, and while she was at the bar, she was sitting in she was sitting in this bar, and while she was, at the bar sitting on the stool, this guy came in, allegedly Clark, dressed up, like he was an older Caucasian wearing a mask with his back hunched over, and he went up and he shot her. Moving on. As to the Stephen Ash murder. Now, I believe Stephen Ash is related to Miss Beverly Ash, maybe her brother or a cousin or something like that. Answer, a few days right after the homicide. Question, where did you have the conversation? Answer, I had the conversation with Clark at his apartment on Clinton Avenue in the Bronx. Who was present at the conversation? Answer, myself, Clark, Sharice was in the apartment. She was in the bedroom. Question, who was actually present during the conversation? Answer, myself, Romar, and Eugene Romero. When you say Romar, you are referring to the defendant Raymond Clark. Answer, yes. Will you tell us what was said? Answer. Mike told me what had happened that night Stephen got murdered. He told me that Romar, or Clark, was sitting on the couch in the living room. Sharice answered the door. He was in the master bedroom, Mike, sitting on the edge of the bed. Question. Mike Romero? Answer. Yes. Sharice told Stephen Ash, who's the relative of Beverly Ash, Mike was in the bedroom. Stephen went in there and Mike was sitting at the edge of the bed and Stephen Ash was standing right directly in front of him with his back facing the door. He had his hands in his pocket and Clark came up from behind and shot him in the head. Question. What, if anything, did Clark tell you happened after that? Answer. He said, quote, the bastard, man, shitted all over himself. We had to put him in the tub, end quote. He said they put him in the tub. They ran the shower on him. They stayed in the apartment a few minutes. Then all Sharice, Mike, and Clark left and went to Pathmark and got some baggies, some garbage bags, and some ropes. Stephen had a weight set up there that he was working out on, and they put some weights in there. And that him and Romar, or Clark, carried Stephen Ash from the apartment to the inside garage and put him in the trunk of the car. So right here, it basically just says, what they did when they got to the trunk of the car, where, the guy Clark says he had to move the body. So let's recap right here. So Stephen Ash, which is the relative of Beverly Ash, appears to be killed after she was. And the way they got him is they called him over. It sounds like there was a woman who answered the door. This guy Clark was sitting on the couch. Stephen Ash comes into the apartment. He walks into the bedroom to talk to another man who was sitting on the edge of the bed. And while he's sitting on the edge of the bed with his back turned, it appears Clark came up from behind and shot him in the head, at least according to this document. All right, so now we want to move forward a little bit so we can understand, well, why was Beverly Shamecca Ash murdered? Was she murdered in a jealous rage from Nikki Barnes? Was she murdered by Guy Fisher or one of his associates? Was she murdered from one of those Caucasian mobsters putting out a hit? Was she murdered from a random act of violence? Let's find out, at least according to these documents. All right. So it says the cruise report provided in pertinent part as follows. Subject case closed, exceptional clearance. 1. Information received from U.S. Attorney Benito Romano is that Mark Redder shot and killed Beverly Ash. This information was obtained from a reliable, high echelon confidential informant that is working for the FBI. The reason for the execution was that Beverly Ash was responsible for the arrest of several organized crime family members who were indicted for a conspiracy to distribute heroin. So what we have right here is some information where, according to information received from the U.S. Attorney Benito Romano, that there was a man by the name of Mark Redder who shot and killed Beverly Ash. So now we have another person. So the first person that's alleged to have shot her was this man by the name of Clark. But now we have information on this gentleman by the name of Mark Redder. And according to this information, it is alleged that he shot and killed Beverly Ash, or Shamecca, the girlfriend of Nikki Barnes. And it says this information was obtained from a reliable, high echelon confidential informant that is working for the FBI. The reason for the execution was that Beverly Ash, or Shamecca, the girlfriend of Nikki Barnes, was responsible for the arrest of several organized crime family members who were indicted for a conspiracy to distribute heroin. So could it have been that maybe Miss Shamecca was knee deep in the streets herself? Could it have been that maybe she was flipping packs? Or could it have been that maybe she was just around the whole operation? She knew, some information. Could it have been maybe her and her brother was doing deals, or maybe her brother was working with maybe the men in Nikki Barnes' organization and they had gotten caught up in something? Could it have been that maybe somebody had set Shamecca up and the police pinched her and the federal government pinched her and they told her that, look, if you can't give us no information, that we're going to lock you up? And possibly she gave information on, quote, several organized crime family members who were indicted for a conspiracy to distribute heroin, end quote. So it goes on to say, the following information received from Special Agent Stan Morrissey of the Drug Enforcement Agency, Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA. So before I move forward, like, this information that's being released, first of all, they're giving us the name of the government official that released it, and they're telling me the department. So this says the U.S. Attorney Benito Romano. So that means that Benito Romano works for the United States prosecution. And when people get in trouble against the United States, the prosecution is who helps them convict the so-called criminal. So this is the United States putting out this information of Mark Redder being killed by Beverly Ash. And this information is coming from an informant that they have that's been working with the FBI, that they're calling reliable and high echelon. And then down here it says the following information received from Special Agent Stan Morrissey of the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA. So they're giving us names and they're giving us organizations in the federal government. You got the legal defense of the United States government with that U.S. attorney. And right here we have a special agent from the DEA. So let's read this. It says that the DEA agent, he has a confidential informant who is a major narcotics violator and who has successfully testified in numerous federal cases. This informant states that Stephen Ash, Beverly Ash, or Shamecca, the girlfriend of Nikki Barnes, and Barry Wilson were murdered by the same perpetrator, Mark Redder. Stephen was killed by Mark as a warning to Nikki Barnes to keep his mouth shut. He was shot behind the Yankee Stadium in the Bronx and dumped into the river. Agent Morrissey further advised that the informant is a reliable and high-level member of an organized crime family, but he cannot be interviewed, identified, nor allowed to testify because of a serious risk to the informant's life and his value to future investigations. This person is in the Federal Witness Protection Program. All right. So this is, the situation that Miss Beverly Shamecca Ash found herself in. She was, she was messing with the drug kingpin and Nikki Barnes. He gets locked up. Now you messing with his next man in position, Mr. Guy Fisher. So that's already causing some negativity. And then now she got these other street activities that she was involved in. Like, what was she doing maybe with her brother? Did they have their own little situation? You know what I'm saying? Was her brother tied into the streets and, had his own little stuff? May have not been on no Nikki Barnes level, but maybe he was getting packs from Nikki Barnes and his crew. And maybe her brother was flipping it and helping getting some of the stuff off. So you had that. Once again, she's one of these so-called Black American women that's knee deep in the streets. So it's not just the men. You got women out there. It's just, the women, they play a different part in it, but nevertheless, they in the same jungle. And as I said, the mosquitoes, the wasps, the ants, the pterodactyls, the dinosaurs, the crocodiles of the streets, they don't care who you are, and they're looking to devour anybody, including a beautiful, attractive woman. So maybe some of them, some of them nerd dudes that, There's some of you sisters that's around y'all, that's still in school, that's still in college, them guys that may not be into the street thing too much, but they still decent guys, you know. They ain't no suckers. You know, they ain't gonna let nobody just try them and walk all over them. But maybe they just not into all the street stuff. You know, maybe some of you women want to push up on them guys and give them a chance, you know. But it's your boy Red Stick Mirage, Green Box Politics. Stay tuned for the next one. We out.